Good morning, it's 7 o'clock. You're watching the only breakfast show live from Westminster, and today, well, no signs of the sleaze row simmering down, forcing new denials from Downing Street this morning. The Work and Pensions Secretary will be on the show shortly, along with the Shadow Health Secretary. Now, a man for all seasons, 2012 hero Greg Rutherford joins us later to discuss how he's hoping to make Olympic history. And may the 4th be with you, the auction date to sell off Star Wars treasures like this. We'll love that. We'll get a glimpse of what's going under the hammer. It is Tuesday, the 27th of April. Race for aid. UK supplies arrive in India as Sky News visits hospitals going to drastic lengths to treat patients.
They've had to build tents in the car park to cope with the overspill. All these people are suffering from coronavirus. All of them need oxygen.
Gross distortions. Downing Street hits back at new claims about alleged comments from the Prime Minister. Are holidays on the horizon? The Greek Tourism Office suggests to Sky News the UK could be edging closer to issuing a health pass for international travel. The cost of miscarriage. Calls for action to better support the mental health of parents. UFO, why Space Command is investigating this supposedly close encounter which triggered a false alarm.
And it's looking cooler and cloudy across many areas today with some showers, but some spots will have sunshine and warmth still. Find out where the sunshine and warmth will be with me later in the programme.
Very good morning to you. In India, now the epicentre of the global COVID pandemic, the need for medical supplies and hospital beds has grown so desperate, patients are being treated in makeshift tents in car parks. More than 300,000 new coronavirus cases have been recorded for a 6th consecutive day, with another 2,771 deaths reported, although health experts believe the real tally is far higher. From New Delhi, our special correspondent Alex Crawford reports.
The struggle to save lives is now tied up with the struggle to find oxygen, and every person in this hospital is part of that fight. And across the Indian capital, it's almost an hourly battle.
Emotionally, we are drained. We have not seen so many mortalities in our ICU as well as in our near and dear ones. I get maybe around 50 calls every day. Somebody asking for beds, somebody asking for cylinders, somebody asking for drugs. We don't have anything available and patients are dying.
India's still reporting global record high numbers for coronavirus cases, and they're struggling now.
Every patient in this room is requiring at least 15 litres a minute. That means at this rate, every 3 hours, it's a struggle for us to arrange for the new oxygen cylinders.
They've got nearly double the number of patients in this hospital, and they're expecting worse to come.
The situation is critical right now. This pandemic is the worst we have ever seen till now. And these 2 weeks are going to be a hell for us.
I want you to have a look at this because it's hard to illustrate the scale of the problem with a country the size of India and with the population of India. But this is just what one hospital has done to cope with the rising number of coronavirus patients. And it keeps on rising. They've had to build tents in the car park to cope with the overspill. All these people are suffering from coronavirus. All of them need oxygen. They can't take in any more. And these are the lucky ones who managed to get help.
International help, including from Britain, is on its way, but it can't come soon enough, with patients struggling for breath and worrying if their lifelines will run out.
Sometimes this is working, sometimes this other cylinder is finishing, sometimes 2 hours here they are putting. So they are lowering the oxygen level, though it is needed, but it should be more. So this is the problem.
India's calamity is the rest of the world's too, with a new, more virulent variant called a double mutation, and doctors saying they're seeing alarming resistance to medicines and vaccines.
The double mutant, it bypasses everything. Even the medicines are not very effective on that. So the medicines which were very helpful in the earlier last wave, which we used to give in the mild cases, it doesn't seem to work now.
There are many more people needing much more oxygen, and they're having to beg, barter and buy from wherever.
I'm buying oxygen at the rate of gold. You know, it has, the situation come to that level. It was like 22 rupees per kg oxygen, and today I sanction for 50 rupees per kg. And the black marketing is happening. Remdesivir injection, which is like 4,000 rupees, or 2,000 also, people are buying at 40,000 rupees.
The government is urging its citizens not to panic and not to hoard, but the oxygen demand has risen around 20% nationally, with some hospitals coming within minutes of running out of supplies, so they're not prepared to listen right now. Alex Crawford, Sky News in New Delhi.
Well, the first consignments of UK aid have now arrived in India. These are the latest pictures of the equipment being unloaded late last night. The Foreign Secretary said international collaboration is key to fighting this global threat. And now, if you've seen the papers this morning, they're all full of the latest sort of allegations, sleaze allegations really is the only way to describe it, against the Prime Minister, against Number 10. Let's talk to the Work and Pensions Secretary, Therese Coffey, who's here. It's good to see you.
Good morning, Steve.
I mean, look, when you look at the papers this morning, I mean, it's depressing stuff. How do you feel about all of this?
Well, the PM answered a lot of questions yesterday, continues to say that our main priority is to get on with the job, whether that's about tackling the virus or indeed about getting young people into work, which we're doing through Kickstart. But I think it's just part of the ongoing aspects of recognising there's a number of different inquiries underway. Cabinet Secretary spoke to Parliament yesterday as well. And frankly, we just our focus is on other things, I think, is the best way to say it.
I mean, do you think mistakes have been made somewhere along the way?
Well, undoubtedly, the things that we were discussing actually with the Chief Scientist and Chief Medical Officer, as was suggested perhaps last year, when certain assumptions were made about how the virus might be transmitted, we have a different understanding of that now. So there's different elements that have gone along the way. But the key thing is we've now got 33 million people vaccinated with their first dose, nearly 13 million with their second dose. So it's all been about trying to make sure that we tackle the coronavirus and actually get on with the roadmap to recovery, because by trying to have also saved lives, we're actually been trying to save livelihoods, and we now need to get the economy really flowing again.
Look, away from the Prime Minister, if you like, but on a personal level to you, if someone ever said, let the bodies pile high, are they comments you could ever personally condone?
Well, the Prime Minister says he didn't say them, and he said that, I think, yesterday, to Sky. So, I take the Prime Minister on his word.
But away from the Prime Minister, if anybody else said it, could you ever condone it?
Well, I'm not aware that any politician has said anything like that, or indeed any other person that I'm aware of. But there's an element here about, as I say, trying to keep on with the main task at hand. We've got through this challenging time. We're still not out of it. That's why we're still encouraging people to take up their vaccines, but also the work like Kickstart of getting young people back into work. Yeah,
look, I know we're going to talk more about Kickstart in just a moment, but in terms of some of the other allegations floating about and to do with the flat in number 11, what's going on with that? It's a confusing picture.
Well, the Prime Minister has said that he has paid for the redevelopment that happened. He's asked Simon Case, who's the highest civil servant in the land, to undertake a review of exactly what happened. Simon was not the Cabinet Secretary when all this started. So it's important that Simon's been allowed to do that. And he said that he would share that with the Select Committee in Parliament. But the point is that I guess for a number of people, it's just while we're trying to make sure that we get through in tackling the virus and get people back into work, I don't think the majority of the British public are in any way interested about some wallpaper or sofas or something like that. So I do understand that we need to keep moving on, as it were, in terms of what's going to make a difference to people's lives in the years ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Charles Walker deputy chair of the 1922 committee, said last night, you know, to paraphrase him, couldn't give two figs about who paid for the flat, as long as it wasn't his constituents.
Well, I think it's important that you know, the Prime Minister will make the declarations in the usual way. These sorts of things often get tidied up in something called the annual accounts, which get published by departments every year. So it's just you know, the right declarations will be made. The Prime Minister paid for it personally. And meantime, he's out leading the government in trying to get back on the roadmap to recovery. And I think we're making good progress on that.
I mean, I know, you know, to this point, all these allegations have been denied. But, I mean, do you accept there is a growing perception of sleaze? I mean, there's a poll in I think it's the Eye this morning, saying that, you know, public opinion is shifting. I mean, this is the damage, isn't it? Whether or not any allegations are true, the perception seems to be sticking.
What I do see is being out on the doorsteps campaigning, which I have been doing myself during this campaign. People are generally optimistic. They're pleased with how we're now getting on. They're excited by the prospect of getting this virus properly under control, recognising it won't go away forever, but seeing the number of vaccines out there and actually life starting to come back to normal. So it's about... I genuinely believe people are just more interested in getting on with their daily lives and the actions that we're taking to help them to get back to more of a new normal, as it were, post-COVID.
What do you think Dominic Cummings is playing at? I don't know if you had any dealings with him, particularly when he was still working in Number 10, but what's he playing at?
I don't know. He was an advisor to the Prime Minister. He didn't really have a lot to do with DWP. I think I had one message about Kickstart, funny enough, last year, and that's about it in my interaction, which I think is a reflection of how we, Department of Work and Pensions, have really got on with the task at hand and spending an extra £7 billion on welfare in the last year because many people have turned to benefits for the first time. We were able to meet that challenge, but our challenge is now to recognise nearly 1 million people have lost their jobs, many millions more, 5 million being protected by the furlough scheme, and we're particularly focusing on young people. And I'm pleased that over 16,000 young people have started their Kickstart role, but we've created and approved nearly 200,000 jobs to be filled over the next year. So it's a really exciting time, but that's happening more quickly now as we move along the roadmap to recovery.
But I mean, look, I get that there is a need to focus on what is happening now and what the government is working on at the moment, but there is some concern, I mean, from William Hague, former leader, of course, who said with the prospect of Dominic Cummings giving evidence before one of the committees, William Hague said in the Times, I think it would be a mistake to dismiss these allegations as a fleeting problem. Dominic Cummings, he says, is likely to turn up to this committee with a trail of digital evidence.
Well, a lot of people will have seen Dominic Cummings for the first time ever last year when he gave a press conference in the Rose Garden at Number 10. They'll have come to their own views, I'm sure, the public. And meanwhile, the Prime Minister continues to get on with the key things that really do matter to people, the people's priorities. So, you know, there's an element here that we have a real level of transparency within government. We publish aspects on a quarterly basis, about our meetings that we have, those sorts of things. So it's important that we, as I say, keep focused. Parliament does its job of scrutiny, which it is doing, and we... as I say, really focus on things like helping people get back into work.
Well, and in terms of that and the Kickstart, you know, I think it was about 2/3 of those who've lost their jobs during the pandemic are under 25. It is very difficult for those people to get places in employment. 16,500 places is impressive in itself, but there's still, you know, we're talking 500,000 people here, so...
You're absolutely right, Stephen.
We've got to get people back up and running quickly, haven't we?
You're absolutely right, Stephen. And I'm conscious, with aspects of the lockdown, it was proving challenging to get some of these jobs kind of underway. But we've seen a real uptick in the number of employers opening their doors, getting young people in, giving that sort of training, that job experience. Later today, I'm going to a leading retailer, again, to look at how they've taken on nearly 300 people, and they're going to be learning a variety of tasks and experiencing opportunities during their time with the retailer. So, you know, we are trying to provide opportunities for people so they get that first foot on the ladder of getting back into work.
Well, what's the appeal to employers for this as you try and get more people into this scheme as businesses reopen?
Well, Kickstart in particular is actually the flagship scheme of our Plan for Jobs more broadly, where we're trying to help people of all ages. But employers get basically wages subsidised, 25 hours free employment. In return, it's a mutual benefit. They have to provide that sort of real role, but also the employability support, so young people are ready to get the next, hopefully, long-term job.
Can I just ask you quickly about Nazanin Zaghari-Radcliffe? I mean, hugely distressing for her and her family and friends over what's happening. The Foreign Secretary says the UK is going to do all it can. What can we do? What options are on the table?
Well, I think that we just keep making representations in the standard diplomatic way. I'm conscious that, you know, this is a decision of the Iran regime, the Iranian judiciary system, and just as we have tried to support this family along the way, we will keep doing so and keep making the case on why we don't think this is appropriate, and in order to try and get Nazarin reunited with her family as quickly as possible.
Therese Coffey, it's good to see you this morning.
Thank
you. Just a reminder that if you want to catch up on any of the interview with Therese or watch the programme when you're out and about this morning, then you can do so just by getting on the mobile app or our website. Go to the live blog to watch the programme, and you can catch up with the interviews on my Twitter as well. That's @SkyStephen. OK, let's talk to our political correspondent, Kate McCann, who's with us now. What did you think, Kate?
I think it's really interesting, isn't it? Because we've been talking about these allegations against Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, against David Cameron, former Prime Minister, now for how long? A couple of weeks at least, maybe over a month. And it's still there. It's still the main chunk of an interview when a government minister comes on any political programme. And that's a problem for the Conservatives, because it's now become a narrative, and that's what Labour is hoping for. That's why they keep talking about Tory sleaze. What the Conservative Party has to do is try and get out from under that. And you heard Therese Coffey there trying to do that, trying to say, you know, it's all about moving on. She actually did acknowledge that there will be some things that the government did get wrong, and that will, of course, form part of an investigation and an inquiry later on. But one of the most fascinating bits for me, and maybe that's just because I'm a bit of a Westminster geek, was that bit at the end where she talked about Dominic Cummings, and you said, you know, Dominic Cummings is going to come before a committee, he's going to have lots of evidence. And she said, well, the public saw Dominic Cummings for the first time when he did that press conference after, of course, Barnard Castle. That's trying to undermine his credibility, and I just wonder whether that might be something that we start to see more of as we go through the next couple of weeks. OK,
Kate, thank you. Now, at 7:30, we're going to ask the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Tom Tugendhat, what next for Nazanin Zaghari-Radcliffe after she was sentenced to another year in prison in Iran. True lava, the Icelandic couple who had their wedding in front of an erupting volcano. Very brave. And
you want a big night? I'll give you a big night.
At 9:30, how London theatres are scouting out the next generation of talent while looking ahead to the next stage of lockdown lifting. Now, could a summer holiday to Greece soon be on the horizon? The country's tourism office has suggested things could be moving in the right direction. Well, let's talk to Aisha Zahid, who's in the newsroom for us this morning. A lot of people will be rubbing their hands in glee at the prospect of this. What's been said, Aisha?
They certainly will be, but it's important to note that this comes with confusion as well. Now, as you said, the Greek Tourism Board have said they will be willing to open their borders to British travellers as long as they can prove that they have been vaccinated through official documentation. And in a statement, they said, our understanding is that a health pass will be forthcoming. Now, it's not clear what this health pass will be. The Times today reported that Greece will be accepting the handwritten NHS vaccine card until there is a digital format. And other countries like Portugal have said this won't be enough for them due to forgery risks. Now, the UK Tourism Minister Nigel Huddleston has said that Britain is working with the EU on vaccine passports for travel, and that's as far as we know. Now, according to the roadmap out of lockdown, non-essential travel will be permitted, could be permitted from 17th of May through a traffic light system, with green-listed countries not requiring a quarantine period, while amber and red-listed countries do. Now, there's still no clear indication of which countries will be in which list. Greece and Portugal have said they're confident that they will be on the green list due to the COVID situation in their countries. But we've got no clarification on this, and foreign travel's been disrupted for more than a year now. People are going to be more keen than ever to take their holidays, and with that date approaching, we've only got 3 weeks now, they're certainly going to be looking for answers.
Aisha, thank you. Let's have a look at some of the other main stories for you this morning. And coronavirus fines are muddled, discriminatory and unfair and should be reviewed. That's according to MPs and peers on the Joint Committee for Human Rights, who say all 85,000 fines that have been issued need to be reviewed. Let's have a look at the latest coronavirus figures for you today. And 2,064 new cases have been reported in the most recent 24-hour period, with 6 more deaths. That means the total number of people who've died is 127,434. Another 79,695 people have had their first vaccine. 260,801 have had their second. That means more than 46.65 million injections have been given out across the UK. An application has been made to pardon George Floyd for a previous drugs conviction. Mr. Floyd was arrested in Houston in 2004 by Officer Gerald Goins for selling $10 worth of crack. Goins now faces a series of charges, including 2 for murder, after a couple died in a drugs raid in 2019. More than 160 drugs convictions tied to the officer have since been dismissed. The US Justice Department is to open a sweeping probe into policing in Louisville, Kentucky, following the death of emergency worker Breonna Taylor. Ms. Taylor had been studying to become a nurse and was shot in bed by officers as part of a drugs raid. No drugs were ever found in her house. It's the second investigation into a police force announced by the Biden administration this week. Just to remind you that you can catch up on the day's big business news and interviews on the Ian King Business Podcast, which is available on the Sky News app or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, there are calls to do more to help support parents who've been through a miscarriage. New figures suggest the cost to society from subsequent mental health issues is more than £400 million. Becky Cottrell reports.
Laura Bradshaw was glowing on her wedding day, but as happy as she was to be marrying her husband Chris, it was not an easy day for them both. 1 month earlier, Laura had a miscarriage.
I think, for me personally, it was a huge shock to have a miscarriage. I know about miscarriage and I've seen about it on, various things, but you don't ever really think it's going to happen to you. And because no one really speaks about it, it's when it does happen, you're just so isolated and you just feel so lonely.
Laura's had 3 more miscarriages since then, but only after the 3rd was she eligible to have tests through the NHS to determine whether there were any underlying medical issues.
It's really, really difficult, and it feels like, because they're saying you have to have 3, like, it's not a big deal. It feels like they're saying, we don't really care, come back when you've, had more.
The charity Tommy's found that parents who go through a miscarriage are twice as likely to experience depression and 4 times as likely to attempt suicide. And the risk of a future miscarriage increases by 10% each time a woman loses a pregnancy. The study also found black women are 40% more likely to have a miscarriage than white women.
For long, miscarriage has been seen as an isolated physical event. It's not. It has got profound implications in terms of future pregnancy risks, such as an increase in the risk of preterm birth, and it has profound implications in terms of the psychological effects that couples who've had miscarriages suffer. For example, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Tommy's estimate that 1 in 4 pregnancies end in a miscarriage. The charity's calling for better care for women after their first miscarriage and more mental health support for women and couples. Laura is finally receiving treatment that she hopes will improve her chances of having a child. But she says she shouldn't have had to wait 4 years and 4 miscarriages to get to this point. Becky Cottrell, Sky News, Essex.
Well, this is Sky News Breakfast. Let's have a check on the weather for you this morning. Naz, how's it going to be today? Please say bright.
There will be some brightness, Stephen. Yes, that's correct. Across southern areas where actually it is going to still be quite mild. But elsewhere, although a mild start, it's generally cool and cloudy with some showers.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. So, generally speaking, we are going to be seeing cooler conditions for many areas for the next few days. It's going to be largely cloudy as well. Still a bit of brightness here and there, but also quite wet at times. There will be scattered showers that could be locally heavy, perhaps even more persistent rain across parts of the south towards the weekend and the return of overnight frost. So a real difference compared to last week. To begin with this morning, it's not so cold compared to previous mornings because we've had cloud cover overnight. So it's quite a dull start to the day for many areas. A little bit of brightness here and there, but generally speaking, quite cloudy. And there are some showers scattered across the north of Ireland, Northern Ireland, over northern England towards the northeast, perhaps even the North Wales, and across Scotland. More persistent spells of rain, mainly across the northeast there. But across central and southern areas, it's a chilly start, but it's sunny. And locally, there's a frost in some spots. Now, going into this afternoon, we're going to see little change on this story, really. It's going to stay mostly cloudy. There will be some breaks in the cloud here and there, so there will be a bit of brightness. But in between those bright or sunny spells, there will be showers dotted about, and some of them could be locally heavy as they become more widespread across much of Ireland, Northern Ireland, Wales, Northern England, perhaps Eastern England later as well. And that rain across Scotland will slowly edge its way further southwards as well. So the northeast becoming a bit dry later, but a brisk wind there. But the south, sunny, dry and warm.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Naz, thank you. Now, of course, I love a space story, so have a look at this. It's an impressive picture. Space debris appears to have narrowly missed 4 SpaceX astronauts shortly after they settled into orbit last Friday. It's a sizable chunk as well, isn't it? The crew were ordered back into their spacesuits, having been warned there was a risk of their capsule colliding with the object. But although the debris looks to have flown close by in these pictures, there was in fact no threat of collision, and the review is underway into what they're now tagging as a false alarm. Now, just a day later, the SpaceX team docked with the International Space Station, the number of astronauts on board rising to 11. It's the biggest number to be in the station in a decade. And of course, it's about 260 miles above the Earth and, at the minute, we think, above the Indian Ocean. To keep a close eye on where it is. It's always good when you can see it passing in the skies overhead. Still to come for you this morning, we're going to be talking about Nazanin Zaghari-Radcliffe and her extended prison sentence. We'll talk to the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee in just a moment.
There are things we all take for granted. As the rivers and tides flow, the sun will rise, the wind will blow, and the earth will spin. But are we now spiralling into a climate crisis which cannot be avoided?
No one can predict the impact that it's going to have. Close to the peak here. This is really the moment of truth. Expected to be hit very hard indeed.
What can be done to reverse the spiral? The Daily Climate Show on Sky News will look for the answers.
You know, it's not exactly a zoomed-in sort of ceremony because they didn't want that from the start. But then, you know, to have the cameras set up in different parts of the world, in London and Paris, and to have some people be able to be there and show their presence was really wonderful. And in the room itself, which was in Union Station, which you can see illuminated behind me, it's a beautiful historic building in downtown Los Angeles, never hosted anything fabulous like the Oscars before. But they had the setup so that the nominees would rotate in and be in the audience. So you didn't have those usual cutaway shots of George Clooney sitting there skulking or chuckling or, you know, the major stars that are always there just in the room to add that sort of energy. But it was a different kind of energy. It was an homage to just the films that were nominated and the films that won. There was so much more diversity last night. In fact, those 2 women being nominated for Best Director and one winning, and being the first woman of color to win was a very, very different sense than the Oscars of days gone by. So yes, a different ceremony, but it was a show of determination for Hollywood that's kind of coming out of its shell, putting the gowns back on, getting out of the sweatpants, putting on a little lipstick because there were no masks that we could see in the camera shots. They were treating it as a movie set. They said that when the cameras were off, the masks went back on. Everyone had been tested, vaccinated, sitting far enough apart to be safe. But Hollywood has been back in business shooting movies and TV shows and for the last few months, as far as we know, with very strict protocols, and those were all in place in the theater last night.
Now, as Nazanin Zaghari-Radcliffe faces up to another year in jail, the Foreign Secretary has called an Iranian court's decision to impose a new sentence totally inhumane and wholly unjustified. Meanwhile, Nazanin's husband, Richard Radcliffe, says she's being used as a political bargaining chip. Well, let's talk to the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Tom Tugendhat. Good to see you this morning. Look, we're talking to Therese Coffey just a few minutes ago, and she said the government is applying as much diplomatic pressure as it can. Clearly, that's not enough. What more can be done?
Well, I think the aspect of the law that was changed yesterday, introducing corruption as one of the means of sanctions, is an important change. I think it means that we can sanction many of the corrupt business people who are supporting this appalling regime. And I think we need to expose quite clearly and in every means possible that this is a regime that is using a mother as a hostage in order to extract leverage. That is an act of complete barbarity. It goes against everything in Islamic law, in humanitarian action. It's absolutely horrific.
But it is very difficult to know quite what can be done. I mean, even if you can apply sanctions on wealthy people propping up the regime, it's no guarantee of action. And even if it is, it could take quite some time.
No, there is no guarantee of action. That's true. It is the decision of the mullahs and their acolytes in Tehran who have decided to hold on to a young mother and separate her from her family. That is their decision. It is a decision by ayatollahs claiming to act in the name of the Iranian people. They're not. They're tyrants, and they're holding an entire country hostage, not just a young mother. And it's an act of complete barbarity. So you're right. We can't force the ayatollahs to change their mind. We can't force the Revolutionary Guard commanders to change their mind. But what we can do is we can make it very plain by revealing where they're getting their money from, how they're stealing off the Iranian people, and where it's all going. It's going into their pockets, and it's going into wars like the war in Syria.
Look, what is she being held for in terms of this idea of being a bargaining chip? What is the regime trying to achieve?
Well, it's very difficult to know. They claim that it's about a £400 million debt that the British government absolutely agrees that it owes to the Iranian government. The only reason it hasn't been paid back is because the Iranian government is sanctioned. When the American government gave back a similar sum a number of years ago, the Iranian government released 6 Americans and a few months later took another 6. So this is simply a means of doing business by the ayatollahs and a way of extracting leverage on other countries. And by the way, there's a German who's being held. There was an Australian. This is how the Iranian government behaves. It's not just about the debt. And so settling the debt, I'm afraid, though it may bring temporary release, would not be a long-term solution.
No, but it may bring, well, temporary release in some respects. It may bring permanent release for Nazanin.
It could do, and many of us support settling the debt, but that's a separate matter, unless, of course, you think it's an acceptable form of international diplomacy to take hostages. We happen to think that's a bad way of conducting business, and I would hope that, in fact, I would be absolutely certain that your viewers think it's an absolutely horrific way of conducting business. And so the Iranian government needs to decide whether it wants to behave like a mafia hit squad or like a responsible government.
You talked about the Foreign Secretary and imposing sanctions on countries that have sort of severe levels of corruption. Now, no one's suggesting it's quite the same here in the UK, but the sleaze allegations are certainly causing... I mean, they're all over the papers, they're on every paper this morning. How concerned are you by what we're seeing reported?
Well, I think integrity matters in politics, and I think these allegations are serious, but let's not overlook the fact that this is in many ways an internal dispute between two people. Now, I hope very much that the accusations will cease and that we can get back to doing what we need to do, which is to recover after the most extraordinarily painful year for many, many people. We need a real recovery in this country. We need a boom of jobs and growth, not just because we need to rebuild the country, but we need to rebuild communities. We need people to come back together, to look to enterprise, to look to opportunity, and to show that the UK really is the place to do business. Look, whether you're investing in Newcastle or Glasgow or Bristol or Belfast, it doesn't matter. We need this country to be booming because this country is a brilliant place to do business, and that means that the government needs to be focusing on that.
Well, yes, but I mean, and that's all well and good. A lot of people would agree with you, but it's only going to be seen as a good place to do business and a good place to do a lot of other stuff if we think those in power are acting with integrity. Now, there are questions as to whether the Prime Minister is.
Well, as I say, there's a lot of gossip going on at the moment. I look forward to the investigations that my parliamentary colleagues have launched, releasing their findings. William Ragg, my fellow chair of a committee, he chairs public administration, is already looking into this. So, we'll find out the answers as soon as he's done that. But my focus is absolutely on making sure this country booms. Now, my focus, as you know, as chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, is making sure that we have partnerships and relationships with countries around the world with whom we can work together on everything from vaccine diplomacy to trade. So I hope that we're going to be building in the kind of partnerships we need to make sure that this country sees the opportunities for every citizen and every community.
Tom Tugendhat, good to talk to you. Thank you. Well, let's just bring in more on those sleaze claims faced by the government and indeed the Prime Minister. The Times has more allegations this morning, including that the Prime Minister told aides he would rather let coronavirus rip than impose a second lockdown. Downing Street has described the reports as gross distortions. Well, earlier we spoke to the Work and Pensions Secretary, Therese Coffey. She admitted the government's understanding of how to tackle the virus has changed over time.
Well, undoubtedly, the things that we were discussing actually with the chief scientist and chief medical officer, as was suggested perhaps last year, when certain assumptions were made about how the virus might be transmitted, we have a different understanding of that now. So there's different elements that have gone along the way. But the key thing is we've now got 33 million people vaccinated with their first dose, nearly 13 million with their second dose. So it's all been about trying to make sure that we tackle the coronavirus and actually get on with the roadmap to recovery.
Well, let's talk to the Shadow Health Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth, who's here in the studio. Good to see you this morning. Look, Therese Coffey saying, there are still lessons to be learned in how we handle the coronavirus pandemic. I mean, is that an indication as to say, well, perhaps some of the language has been wrong? Do you think? I mean, she denies that in one sense, but clearly an indication that things do need to be looked at again.
Well, there definitely are lessons to be learned. I mean, we're still not paying people decent sick pay so they can isolate themselves, for example. I think that is a monstrous failing in the government's response. But the question is, did Boris Johnson say these sickening, crass words about allowing bodies to pile up? There's more sources telling very respected journalists that he definitely said it. He apparently shouted it in anger from his office. I mean, there'll be so many people who have lost a mum or a grandma or a father in this crisis who never got the chance to say a proper goodbye, never got the opportunity of a proper family funeral. And those remarks were just, well, they were disgusting, really, weren't they? And I think it is serious if there's more and more sources telling newspapers and journalists that he definitely said it.
But, you know, he's denied saying it. Michael Gove, who was in the room at the time, said he never heard those words. So, who do we believe?
Well, I mean, this is why it's slightly bewildering, isn't it? Because Michael Gove didn't entirely deny it, he just said he wasn't in the room. But you have got very serious, respected political journalists that in the newspapers and on broadcast channels saying they've definitely got sources who are telling them he definitely said it and he shouted it down the corridor from his office in anger. Look, the key thing is that the handling of this crisis hasn't gone well. There are things that we got desperately wrong, like not paying sick pay, not having the proper PPE for NHS staff early on, not protecting our care homes where so many people died. So, and delaying going into the lockdowns. I mean, that's what this is about, isn't it? Johnson didn't want to put us into the lockdowns. His former right-hand man, Dominic Cummings, who he brought into the heart of Downing Street, is letting it be known that he wanted the lockdowns sooner. This is such a mess at a time when the country is in crisis. Politicians, the government, they've got to be better than this.
No, but what you're saying, you believe what Dominic Cummings has to say, the man who, you know, so you say he wanted lockdown sooner. He's the one who was tripping off to Barnard Castle. I mean, you can't disbelieve him on one thing and believe him on another.
Well, in some ways, it's difficult to know who to believe because it's such a mess, isn't it? I mean, I've been talking about the fact that we've got 400,000 people waiting over a year for treatment now. That's people waiting longer for cancer treatment, for waiting longer with heart disease. We've got the highest waits on record now for children with eating disorders. I mean, these are the issues I want the Prime Minister and the Cabinet to focus on. But you've got Boris Johnson ringing up journalists himself to slag off Dominic Cummings. I mean, it's crazy when the country is in such a mess that this is what they are focusing on, this fighting and backbiting. Surely the country deserves better than this.
Well, a lot of people may agree with you. So why then are you so determined as a party to get people to focus on his flat refurbishment of all things? I mean, why does that matter at this time when we're told there's going to be an investigation, but we're also told that he's paid for this himself?
Well, I think it does matter because we know he wanted to upgrade his flat because he didn't think the John Lewis furniture was good enough. I mean, I think John Lewis furniture is pretty good, actually, pretty posh stuff. But,
yeah,
but the second thing...
They're given £30,000 a year to make changes. That's acceptable.
But he wanted a more lavish upgrade of the flat. But yesterday he said he paid for it. Overnight, we've had reports that the Tory party head office paid for it. We know they were asking business people to fund it. So we need to know whether he's had a loan from somebody. Is he paying it back to them? Is he paying it back to them with interest? And who he is beholden to. Because if somebody has funded his sofas and his bedding and the bed he sleeps in at night, we need to know whether that person has an interest in government policy, whether that person has an interest in winning government contracts. But the reason why there's so many questions this morning, the reason why you're asking me questions this morning is because Boris Johnson still hasn't offered a full and frank explanation. And we deserve transparency. Because when you're the most powerful politician in the land, we need to know who you are beholden to.
Yeah, but he has said that, or it has been made known, if it's come from him directly, to be fair, but that the Prime Minister has paid for all of that refurb now out of his own pocket.
Well, we don't know that because overnight we're hearing that the Tory party head office has funded it through donations. So we still don't have...
But the implication is if that was the case, it's been paid back.
Yeah, but to who? See, if you're the most powerful politician in the land and somebody's coming along and donating to you so you can buy a bed and a sofa and posh cushions and rugs for your flat, we need to know who that is because we need to know what you then owe that business person. Because if you're responsible... I mean, we've seen so many contracts, haven't we, go out to sort of Tory party donors in this crisis, and so many business people have got contracts which have turned out for the PPE, and they turned out it was duff PPE. We had a contract going to somebody based in... a jeweller based in Miami, and all the PPE they sent wasn't up to scratch. We need to know this stuff. We need to know who the Prime Minister has obligations to, which is why you're supposed to declare it all in a ministerial register. But he's not done that. So why hasn't he done that? People will assume he's got something to hide unless he offers that full and frank explanation.
Do you think the public care? I mean, in the sense that, I mean, Therese Coffey, again, and it's a valid point in a way, saying, look, people have got more to worry about in their own lives, particularly at the moment, than what wallpaper's going up in number 11.
I think the public want politicians to act with integrity. And to be honest, if I walk down the street in Leicester, and even if nobody raises it with me as I walk down the street in Leicester, I still think it's important that politicians here fight for honesty and integrity in public life. And that's what this is about. If we're not prepared to stand up for integrity in public life, what is the point of being in politics?
Look, you mentioned earlier on about the number of people on waiting lists in the UK on the NHS. I mean, you're putting forward a recovery plan. There's a very big question as to quite what you can do, and if that recovery plan is just going to put an exponential amount of pressure on the NHS staff already strained to the very limit.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really, really fair point, because our NHS staff have really been through it, haven't they? And they are facing, I mean, a lot of them are facing trauma and burnout after the year that they've had. But, of course, we've got these waiting lists just growing, getting higher and higher and higher. And that will mean people will die, people will be left with permanent disability. So we need a plan to deal with this. So you've got to treat your staff properly. You've got to give them a fair pay rise for a start. You've got to give them a proper sort of recuperation support and well-being support. But you've also got to get the money into the NHS so you can start bringing these waiting lists down again. As I say, we've got the highest waits on record now for children with eating disorders. We've got people waiting longer for cancer treatment, for treatment to do with their, heart problem treatments. People are going to die unless we get something in place to deal with this.
Yeah, but again, I want to push you on what? I mean, yeah, a lot of people are going to say, yes, they need a better pay rise, yes, they need more support, but that doesn't speed up the process of clearing a backlog, does it? I mean, what actually can you put in place that is going to clear a backlog more quickly?
Well, I'm not underestimating the scale of the challenge, and you're clearly not going to resolve this overnight, but it does start with funding properly. It starts with funding equipment. We have some of the lowest numbers per head of MRI scanners, CT scanners in the OECD. It starts with funding beds. We've cut around 15,000 beds over the last 10 years in our NHS. So there are things you can do to start bringing those waiting lists down. But obviously, it's not going to happen overnight. I'm not going to be dishonest with the British public on that. But you've got to make a start on it, because the longer we leave this, the worse this is going to get. OK,
Jonathan Ashworth, good to talk to you this morning. Thank you. Now, let's return to India, where record numbers of coronavirus cases have left health services absolutely on their knees. Well, our special correspondent, Alex Crawford, joins us now from Haryana State, outside of Delhi. And just what is the current situation, Alex?
Well, there's still a very acute shortage of oxygen, it seems, across India. Certainly one of the hospitals that we went to yesterday was telling us how they go hour to hour, really, and they were trying to get through the next 6 hours. And this morning, they put out yet another red flag warning about the shortage of oxygen. These people here have set up their own impromptu, very small, but just trying to do their bit. They travelled around the state. They went 500 kilometres away to try to source oxygen, which they bought in as many cylinders as they could. It was only about a dozen or so. And people have been camping out here under the trees just to get access to that oxygen. Many of them, as we've been finding in many of these places, and the number of the hospitals that we visited, have been turned away from hospitals, even the government hospitals, the private hospitals, because they too are running short on oxygen. And clearly that's put everyone in a very high state of distress. Delhi and India has posted yet more global record highs in the number of coronavirus cases. It dipped slightly today on the 6th day, but it's still a global record high in the spike of cases. And international aid is finally beginning to arrive. The British aid arrived this morning, vital medical supplies, along with, I understand, about 20 oxygen ventilators. Well, that's grasped with great gratitude from the people of India, but clearly it's not going to go very far when you just have a quick look here at just this small little patch under trees and how many people are actually needing oxygen. One woman told us she'd been here for 2 days already, when clearly she should probably be in a hospital. Well, one of the people who are running it is Ishan Singh. Let's try and have a quick word with him. Ishan, you're live on Sky News.
Hi.
Tell me, how critical is the situation here and how much trouble have you had in finding oxygen?
See, if I talk about the ground situation over here, we have patients who are waiting here for 2 days. They're not finding any hospital. They just wanted oxygen because their doctor has advised they're on high antibiotics. So that lady over there, if you see, she is here with our sons. They rented a car and they came here 2 days back. And still they cannot find any hospital. They cannot find any bed. They're still here because their doctor has advised. If we see over there's a man behind me. He came here 3 days back. He was fine. He went back. Again, he came back. So his oxygen is going up and down. There's no medical facility, proper facility available. Yes.
And what do you think, as an Indian, of this state of affairs when it's reduced to charities like yourself trying to provide people with air? What do you make of that as an Indian?
Actually, it's not just about an Indian. I, being a Sikh, I can come from a Sikh religion. So we have always given the service to people, starting from Guru Nanak Dev Ji, our first Guru, starting way back in 1469. So he gave free food to hungry people, and it started from there. And when Guru Gobind Singh Ji, our 10th Guru, he was in wars.
Don't mean to interrupt you. I totally understand the history lesson. I just wanted to get a sense, as Indians, how desperate you're feeling. Clearly the Sikhs have got a long history in helping people, but just a global view on how desperate you're feeling. The rest of the world is looking in at you and seeing that you've got the global record highs in coronavirus cases and you're running out of basic things like oxygen.
Actually, the thing is, over here we don't see anyone as a stranger. We all are a family. This lady over here, I call her as my mother, as my sister and everything. This old man over here, I call him as my grandfather or father. So when I see my family over here struggling for oxygen, struggling for medicines, I have to come here and I have to serve my people. That's what we feel. And our charity called Hemkund Foundation, we started 10 years back, and in the lockdown last year, we were on the ground, we were delivering food and everything.
Well, you're doing a great job. Thank you very much, Ishan Singh from the Hemkund Foundation, one of many who are set up to try and help ordinary people, because it doesn't matter where you are throughout India, there seems to be a real acute shortage of oxygen, and that is clearly having an impact on getting people better, and a lot of people very suspicious about the numbers and questioning whether they're absolutely accurate. They could be a lot worse. OK,
Alex, thank you. Well, let's talk to Dr. Lance Pinto, as a consultant respirologist at Hinduja Hospital in Mumbai. Good to see you this morning. Look, what is the situation like in the Hinduja Hospital today?
So fortunately, the city of Mumbai doesn't seem to be facing the kind of challenges that we've heard from across the country. We've not really faced a situation where oxygen levels have been low to such an extent that we've had to compromise patient care ever so far. And we have been constantly reassured that oxygen will be taken care of. We've been told to ration oxygen, to be sensible about how we use oxygen, but not once have we had to compromise patient care, fortunately. But I do realize this may not be the state of affairs in the rest of the country.
And why do you think the country has got so bad?
I think nobody anticipated the scale or the magnitude of what we are facing right now. I think all of us got a little complacent based on the fact that the numbers reduced to such low levels in the month of January that we thought that the worst was behind us. I think COVID-19 has been a lesson for all countries across the world that we need to be prepared for escalation in healthcare whenever the situation demands it, and we cannot be complacent about healthcare. And I think that's a universal lesson that all countries across the world have learned during this pandemic.
In terms of India's specific requirements, I mean, clearly you'll say you're in a better position than most, but what is needed now? I mean, is it a supply of oxygen? Is it ventilators? Is it vaccines? What does India need the most?
So I think what we need could be split into what we need immediately, and clearly what we need immediately is escalation in oxygen supplies, escalation in ventilators, bed availability to patients who desperately need it. And I think a lot has been done. I think there's a lot of aid coming in from countries across the world where we have oxygen tanks which are being sent to us. We have compressed oxygen that's moving across the country using the country's railway system to get it to the places that need it the most. I think the lockdowns have been extended to a great extent. There are hotels which are being recruited towards patient care. I think this is the short-term requirement which we really need, including ventilators. And thankfully, I think everybody is risen to the occasion in trying to help India to the best of their capacities. From a more long-term perspective, of course, we need to escalate our vaccination drive. I think one lesson that has been consistent across the world is that finally it's vaccination coverage, it's universal coverage with vaccination that is going to help us overcome the pandemic. And I think we need help in terms of whatever supplies, whatever supply channels need to be in place for us to be able to escalate our vaccination production and distribution.
OK. Dr. Lance Pinto, it's good to talk to you this morning. Thank you very much indeed. Well, we'll bring you more on the escalating situation in India in the next hour on Sky News Breakfast.